Okay, so I'm putting this together more now. So I thought that he was just another version of the Man in Black. Wow. All right, that changes my perspective on this section. You know, these books, man, if you don't have somebody to talk to, I don't know, I would come away thinking something completely
That's why you got to read them like 8 times.
Yeah, I totally like. I'm like, how is this even gonna?
Right.
How's this even gonna
logistically
work?
How does it work?
She's gonna eventually get magic legs where she can walk the rest of the story or something. You know, like any other writer would have written some way to just shoehorn in. Now she's got legs.
Right. Exactly.
There's so many ways that Stephen King could have written a way to get around this wheelchair situation, but he chose not to.
He chose not to,
and it is such a like non-part of her character. It's only mentioned whenever it has to be, you know? And I think, you know, he could have gotten away from that and he didn't. I think that's a very conscious choice. One of the questions that I have is the way station. So Jake ends up at the way station after he dies. So yes. Jake gets hit by a car, ends up at the way station. Callahan jumps out the window, dies, wakes up at the way station.
Yes.
But Eddie and Susanna.
So, you know, all throughout the books, you've been seeing North Central Positronics and Sombra and stuff. Now you're starting to find out, you know, kind of more about them. So, you know, like this Sayre guy is, I don't know, the face of their corporation, maybe.
It's essentially the same character where he is sort of, he's not able to manipulate free will, so to speak. But he understands fate and destiny, moving people and pieces and trying to put things in a way that, like, sure, I can't force your hand, but I can put you in a situation where you basically only have one choice. And so in that way, I have forced your hand.
Roland gets to see which is really cool. Like, my big thing is, I play disc golf. I've thrown disc type things. These chicks are ridiculously accurate. It's Ka that they come to this place and that these people do this.
I know that you know because you've read the whole book, but just to give the Cliff Notes version of that whole story is he sees one with the mask off and he tells his son what he saw, and his son told him not to tell anybody, and he's never told anybody until he tells Eddie.
Right.
I have 2 theories, and I don't want you to tell me if I'm right. So turn off your camera. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So I have 2 theories. One is that Rose, a Stone, an Unfound Door, episode 25, Fireside Palaver. This episode, we're going to be doing our part 2 recap and check-in for part 2 of Wolves of the Calla. We don't have much else to talk about this episode, so it's all going to be Wolves of Calla. So let's get into that.
I mean, there's so much. Like I said, this book like really starts going crazy. So yeah, you know, last time we got into with Callahan telling his story, and we found out all about vampires.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's
a lot of coincidences happening of people and names and different things like that. Coincidence has been canceled, honey, was what Susanna says. Like, because nothing's a coincidence at this point anymore. It's, I guess, Ka. But yeah, I mean, you find out that Callahan just decides he's going to go ham on vampires and just start killing them.
Yeah,
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, essentially, this chapter of his story is Callahan the vampire hunter. One of the interesting things I found about this part was the whole tie-in of the spreading of AIDS and the vampires. Yeah, that was a pretty interesting kind of just extra tidbit on the vampire story, bloodborne pathogens. I thought that was really interesting, and then also just the various communities that Callahan kind of like, you know, drifts in and out of throughout this whole section of the book.
Right.
He's retelling his stories. You know, he works for various like soup kitchens and homes and then construction crews and
movers.
He's doing all these sort of like, you know, below society, like in the underbelly of society kind of jobs. And we find out, I think I touched on it in the first part, and I think we touched on it in the last episode, but that he sees these vampires. and he's kind of taken into killing them. But not only that, he's kind of drifting in and out of different versions of America, and he's tracking it by what faces are on his money in his wallet.
Right. Which is very cool.
It is very cool. I was confused by this part. I wanted to ask you, so was his money changing, or was it like, oh, he got paid and now he can't use his money because it's counterfeit because it's got like the wrong
I think it was changing. I think it was changing. So like if he looked at, the $1 bill and it had George Washington on it.
Yeah.
And, another place it may have Thomas Jefferson on it, but it's the same, like, he still has the $1. It just depends on where he is, what picture's on it. And there's that. And then like kind of the same thing with the names and like in the newspapers and different things he picks up there, like towns. Like the first one, he walks over that bridge into New Jersey and he's like, this is supposed to be whatever New Jersey.
Yeah.
But it's like some other place. And he's just like, okay, he just rolls with it. Like, whatever. Like
a footbridge.
I'm going to get a job here either way.
It was like a footbridge under the George Washington Bridge. And him and Eddie kind of have a moment where they're talking about like, there's no footbridge under this George Washington Bridge. And he's like, oh yeah, sure there is.
I assure you there is. You may not have seen it, but he does all that drifting around. And I really like, so you get the graffiti and the pet signs. I like how they call him the Irish setter. We've lost our Irish setter. And it's basically like, you don't know what it is at first. He just knows that it's some kind of signal of like, he has a hurt paw. It's like somebody's communicating sort of a roundabout place where this person might be. They're not exactly sure who he is or what he is, but they're putting out these feelers. And then
I was kind of wondering at this point if he was actually like just paranoid and imagining this, that it wasn't really connected to him at all. It was all just coincidence. But then of course it ties into what he comes to call the low men.
The low men.
And that is an interesting concept. The low men. So at this point in the book, he's starting to discover that they're looking for him and that they're using these lost pet signs as a way to communicate. And then later on in his story, he notices it in other ways too, like chalk writings, on the sidewalk.
On the sidewalks and stuff, yeah.
But as far as like me as the first time reader of this and knowing what the low men are, the only connections I have is that Callahan says that he believes that they're soldiers of the Crimson King, that they're like henchmen to the Crimson King. And up to this point, up till reading, I think most of this whole series, I've always thought that was the Man in Black. I never really put it together that the Man in Black is not the Crimson King.
He is not, no.
This book, and at some point in this section, was the first time that I learned that. And I think it's
been mentioned, but like, yeah, I mean, you may not have picked up on it.
Okay.
Because they haven't talked a lot about the Crimson King other than like seeing the Seguls and things like that. But like,
right.
I think Martin or Walter or whatever mentions it at some point.
See, I thought that Martin, Walter, Man in Black, whoever, he plays all these different roles throughout these different stories, and and in one of these he must have been the Crimson King. So I thought that's what it was, but apparently not. It's
no.
So that's even crazier. Oh, I know when you find that out, or when I figured it out, was in the way station at the end of this story. That's whenever I figured it out. But there's even a mention during this section that like they have like coffin tattoos, so that kind of harkens back to the coffin hunters.
Yes.
Could it be? So I wanted to ask you this: could it be that the coffin hunters of the previous book, the low men, didn't exist in the way that they do in this story back then, but this is just like a new variation of the coffin hunters,
Yeah.
And there's been other low men / coffin hunters in other time periods that may have went by other, names, but there's maybe they all had coffin tattoos, or maybe there's other things that kind of connect
I would
them.
just say that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good assessment. Yeah. Cause I mean, like, again, there's no coincidences anymore. Like what I said, like it's not a coincidence that they have coffin, on their hands.
Just even going back to a lot of times, I like to talk about how Stephen King like wrote the story, and like I can see that like maybe this was his way of like tying, this together with, what was just these kind of rogue characters in this other book. He's now made it like a part of the lore of the rest of the series because of that. Just because of the tattoo on the back of the hand, it ties that to those two groups of people together in that way.
So you got Hearts in Atlantis, which is a book of short stories. So there's one in here that really, like, at some point we need to read. Maybe we can read just that story. You don't have to read the whole book, but just that story, which is the first story is called Low Men in Yellow Coats.
Oh.
And like there was a movie made out of it. It was called Hearts in Atlantis, but it had Anthony Hopkins in it.
I remember the movie. I never saw it, but I remember the cover of the movie and Anthony Hopkins.
But this story is really good, and it ties in like hella. It ties into the Dark Tower, especially once we move on after this book. This story, obviously, because it's about low men, but it's a really good story. And like I said, it's, the other stories don't really have anything to do with, it's just 4 different stories. But and then there's another story in another book that's a short story that we might want to read too. But I think other than that, there's nothing, major coming up as far as like.
Yeah, maybe we can read those between this one and the next.
Yeah, that's what I say. The low men are really cool. There's several other. There's a book called From a Buick 8 that he wrote. In his description of the low men, he was like, they wear like when I think of the low men, the old Looney Tunes cartoons, and you'd have the wolves that wore like the spats kind of thing and the hats. That's what I think of. Yeah. With low men, I think of the wolf with and then they drive like really fancy cars, but like really low rider, like decked out kind of thing. And so like From a Buick 8 is essentially about one of those cars. And it's a different story. Some people like it, some people don't, because it's definitely different. But there's a lot of stories about low men that are really good.
I mean, I imagine they're going to be a reoccurring thing, I guess.
Right.
It feels like they should have been, added in earlier, but I guess this was a concept maybe he started putting in his stories later in his career.
Yeah, maybe. Because I'm trying to think, most of those, were probably
around the time period or just
Dark Tower, like this thing, yeah. Yeah, but anyway, so, they are. And I think, yes, they are. I think they are soldiers of the Crimson King. There's definitely a hierarchy. And, if Crimson King is like the king, then the Man in Black is like, the hand of the king or something like that. He's like one of the bigger, kind of people. He's switching between worlds all the time. He's doing all his traveling. He basically finds another version of home in Detroit, I think it was. Mm-hmm. And so he kind of gets in the same thing, and then, he says he gets complacent, and he does. That's kind of how the low men come into it, because he's saying like the vampire, the type 3s are idiots, and that and they couldn't find them, and then the low men aren't much better. They're kind of dumb too, but now, unbeknownst to him, more people have stood up and took notice, and they're more cunning than the other ones are.
So there's a whole, let's talk about Callahan's like version of Toadash or whatever's going on here. So Callahan has the same deal with the like dead people that he sees on the sidewalk and stuff like that the quartet saw back in their Toadash. And also he has the vampires that he sees, but then also the low men. And the low men, the vampires, they don't seem to be working together. Maybe they don't seem to be working together at all. Maybe not at first anyway. They do come into the story later on, because whenever the man in black lures him out to the conference room, he has it filled with vampires. So they had some agreement at some point to set that arrangement up.
The way I took that part is so Callahan and these other two guys from that home, they go to this place where they were being told that they were going to be gifted $1 million for this thing, for their charity and all this stuff. And like Callahan, in telling the story, says he knows better or should have known better, but at the time he was blinded by the money. But anyway, it's a trap set by what he doesn't know, but this guy Sayer, that's, you know, he kind of names him, this Richard Sayer guy. He is like the hierarchy. He's probably another couple steps down from the man in black or something. Callahan finally gets on his radar, and he's like, you know, I'm gonna take care of this Callahan guy. And he brings in some of those vampires and some of the low men. When Callahan is confronted by them, like, he has to make a decision. Like, Callahan makes a run for the window and jumps. And I thought the same thing. Like, and Stephen King kind of mentions it, like, because Callahan's like, what happens if the glass doesn't break? And I kept thinking the same thing. I was like, way up on the 30-something floor, like, what's the chances of you going through that? But again, it's Ka, so he had to have gone through the window because there was no other choice. Yeah. But so he goes through the door and then he doesn't fall. It's basically Wile E. Coyote again. Like, he goes out, he doesn't fall, and he's sure he's going to fall. But then, like, he just wakes up and he's in what he doesn't know he's in, but he's in the way station where Jake was.
So one of the questions that I have is the way station. So Jake ends up at the way station after he dies. So Jake gets hit by a car, ends up at the way station. Callahan jumps out the window, dies, wakes up at the way station.
Yes.
But Eddie and Susanna, they came in a different way. They came in through doors. So, and if it was just that if you died in this world and you ended up in the way, like, would this world be populated with people from our world that just die and end up at the way station? There'd be a whole community of people around the way station. They're like, yeah, we just popped up here.
I always thought about that too. Like, but I think it's more of like you're chosen. Like, it's not everybody. Like, the reason Jake and Callahan woke up there is because they've been chosen by, and we're going to get into a lot of religion type things kind of coming to, like, gods and different things. And I think, like, because, like, you've got the turtle, which, you know, they've talked about several times as a guardian, but, like, you know, in it, the turtle is in it, and, like, essentially, like, I mean, not really a spoiler, but just in case for people, spoiler, the turtle essentially chose those kids as its defender against it.
Okay.
And I think that's kind of what the concept here is that Jake is essential to the tower quest. And therefore, if he dies, he's going to show back up. Like maybe it's kind of like the get out of jail thing where in Monopoly, where, like, oh, whoops, I'm in jail. Well, next turn you go right back to go, kind of thing, and start over. And I mean, because I always thought the same thing. Like, man, if people keep dying and showing up at this way station, like,
I mean, yeah. Well, I can I can conceive the fact that it's that, Ka brought them there. They're important to not just the story,
Right.
but they're important to, the outcome of the tower and this.
The saving of the tower and the rose and all that stuff.
Right.
And like, you gotta understand, like, again, with Ka is like destiny and like, cause you can't fight Ka and blah, blah. So like death, not even death can stop the flow of Ka. And I think that's kind of.
So what do you think? What do you think the key things are from Callahan's story? Like the key, like takeaway. Like why did Callahan, go through this experience of being this drifter, killing vampires, and then he introduces the story of the vampires and the story of the low men, and like why is it so important that the Crimson King / Walter / the low men / the vampires, that they're all hunting, this nomadic character?
Right. Well, I mean, I think as far as at first, the good question with Ka in this is like essentially, if you believe Ka, then everything that's happened is predestined. Like, because like it's Ka, you can't break it. So everything that happens for a reason. So did he become like chosen before the events of Salem's Lot, or did he become chosen because he stood up to Barlow even though he lost, and he gained this power of seeing vampires? And then did Ka decide to use him at that point?
Right.
And I mean, honestly, I don't know, but the fact that I think it started out, the fact that he could see the vampires is what kind of first put him on the map. But I think it was more of a nuisance because, again, it was just the type 3 vampires, and they're just mosquitoes. Mm-hmm. And so not a lot of people cared. But then I think he kept doing it more and more and did it so much, then it started bringing attention to him. I don't know that they are focusing on him because they know something more about him. Like, I don't, because like this guy Sayer coming into it, yeah, that's a big thing just for a guy that's been killing type 3 vampires and he's been eluding people, but like he hasn't done anything crazy, and because they are usually like a small time crook isn't going to get on the radar of the FBI until they do something crazy.
Yeah.
Or crazy big. He was doing the petty stuff, just killing the type 3 vampires, but somehow he got on the FBI's radar.
Yeah.
And
you touched on something that I didn't, I had a question about this. You just reminded me. So Sayer, who is Sayer? Where did he come from? I recognize him from the story because he's the main vampire, that lures him to that meeting. But who was he before that? What? So
they haven't. He's only shown up one other time that I can remember, and it wasn't him physically. It was his name. So when Eddie and Jake are in the Manhattan Restaurant of the Mind, and they're in Balazar. I can't remember. I don't think Balazar was in there. I think it was just Andolini and stuff. And they're reading. Eddie walked around and read the note that contract thing was on.
Yeah.
And it said from Richard Sayer, like whatever VP of something at Sombra Corporation.
Yeah.
So like, like you're. So, all throughout the books, you've been seeing North Central Positronics and Sombra and stuff. Now you're starting to find out, kind of more about them. So, like this Sayer guy is kind of like their, I don't know, the face of their corporation, maybe. But he's obviously somebody big in Sombra.
Yeah.
If he's dealing with the vacant lot and then with Callahan.
Okay, so I'm putting this together more now. So I thought that he was just another version of the Man in Black. Whenever I read that scene of Callahan jumping out the window, I thought that was Walter, just in this world,
No.
this character. Okay. Wow. All right, that changes my perspective on this section. You know, these books, man, if you don't have somebody to talk to, I don't know, I would come away thinking something completely
That's why you got to read them like 8 times.
Yeah, I totally just thought, because then whenever he goes to the way station and the man in black introduces himself, actually, I think the narration introduces him. He doesn't actually ever tell Callahan he's Walter, but the narration starts calling him Walter or something like that. And I thought it was strange. I was like, well, didn't you guys just meet in the previous chapter?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like I said, this goes back and forth, and especially Callahan's telling.
Yeah,
it jumps all over the place in this section.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah,
right.
like
so. The other thing that I think is important from his section is the Nazis, the Hitler brothers. Yeah.
So essentially, that they're another group. So like,
but they were just like hired by the.
They were just they were just thugs. They were just hired because they had been like a big thing in New York or whatever for a while, and then they've been beating people up. Mostly it was homosexuals and like homeless people, stuff like that, and then like.
People Nazis don't like.
Yeah, people Nazis don't like. Black people, like, yeah. So, like, when the low men and the vampires were being unsuccessful, I think it's probably Sayre reached out to them and was like, hey, we'll give you this amount of money or something if you bring, pictures of you killing this guy, so we know. But yeah, I mean, they had been a menace, and like even Eddie knew about them because they had like this kid's story about the evil Hitler brothers will come get you or something like that. But that's so like
I never heard it. So this was a real thing in history. Like I never heard of these people.
I don't know if they were real or not. I don't know if he just made them up.
I'm scared to Google.
But yeah, so like they. With Callahan coming back to New York to see his friend that they had messed up too, he I guess got homesick for home, and even though he didn't want to, he goes there, and that's they had been paid to watch, and they take him, and this is another such a good thing. So like they're gonna really mess him up. They're gonna kill him and torture him and do all this stuff. They're gonna take his balls off and all that craziness, and then all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, the cavalry arrives, and they're like, these two people save him, and he has no idea who they are. He other than he knows that they're not the kind of people that do this. Like, he's like they're very amateurish, and like he's surprised they didn't kill themselves and not get killed by the other ones too, kind of thing.
I liked how Eddie or Jake won. They're like, was it us? They're thinking, well, maybe.
Right, yeah. I think that was Jake. He was like, was it us?
Because I thought that's what it was setting up for, was that they were going to go back in time and save him. And so I think Stephen King's smart enough to know that clever readers would assume that. And so he went ahead and just introduced the question as part of the premise, which was a brilliant way to write that part.
Right. Yeah, it's great because like, then you're like, okay, who is this? And that's the big thing is like, how did these people know that he was in there with these two people anyway? Like, it just seems very random. It was too random, according to him. But then he's like, do you know me? And they're like, no. And then he's like, well, maybe sort of, you're a father or something like that. And like, all he can see is the ring on one of the guy's fingers. And, that's very telling too, could be a setup for something. Who knows? But yeah, like, so he doesn't wind up escaping, but that's where the cross comes from, because they were going to carve the swastika into his forehead, and they only got the cross.
Let me tell you one crazy idea I had when I first started reading the book. I quickly learned that I'm wrong about this idea, but one of the ideas I had was, you remember how Charles Manson had the X on his head and then it turned into a swastika? I was thinking, what if it turns out that this is Charles Manson somehow? Like, Stephen King would do a weird like story like that, where it's like this weird redemption story of Charles Manson. But after we learned more about Callahan, there was nothing creepy or like weird about him. So I was like, all right, I don't think I'm right about that. I think I'm way off base.
The question would be, if he went back through the door before it was carved into his forehead, would it still be there?
Yeah.
Would it be a lost thing?
Would if Callahan went back through the door and kept himself from jumping out of the window?
Ooh.
Could he have ever died to end up at the door in the first place to save himself?
Deep thoughts.
Yeah, I have a thought about Eddie going back to New York that's of the same vein, but I want to save it for the end because it's not part of this section. But before we get off, don't let me forget.
Yeah. So he. What were we talking about there?
I think we
were just talking about Callahan. Like, so one of the cool things after he dies, talking about him dying, and then he wakes up at the way station, is you get this. Again, with this whole predestination thing, when he's talking to the man in black.
Yeah.
And like he's called Fada. Hey, Fada. Like, but anyway, like he's talking to him like the man in black, he's talking to Father Callahan like he knows like all this stuff. That that he's saying things and Callahan doesn't understand it, but it's kind of like an inside joke with himself about things that he knows going to happen. Like, you're going to take this, and there's those two figures out there. He's like, don't worry about them. You probably never see them, but just in case, this thing's here for you, and like it. The Man in Black is such an interesting character because he doesn't show up a lot, like through these few books, like, and he's different characters too, so he's not always doing the same thing, depending. But like, he feels almost like not a watcher, but like he's someone outside of the story, but he's making himself involved in the story too. Maybe sort of like a wit. Like he's he's a catalyst. Like he's like Loki. He's like a catalyst of chaos, and but he's not like.
I don't
think he's necessarily evil either. Like, I think it's weird. Like, I don't know.
I think he's evil. I think he's probably evil. He reminds me of, and I'm sure the comparison is in reverse. It's only because I've watched Lost before I read The Dark Tower, but the Man in Black in Lost,
definitely
is essentially the same character, where he is sort of he's not able to manipulate free will, so to speak, but he understands fate and destiny and the power of being bound by time and time travel. And he's constantly in competition and like moving people and pieces and trying to put things in a way that, like, sure, I can't force your hand, but I can put you in a situation where you basically only have one choice. And so in that way, I have forced your hand. And this scene here where he's given Black 13 to Callahan under the slim chance that his other plans don't work out. He's got this plan in place, 7 steps down the way.
Way down the way.
Yeah.
And I like how he's like, he debates on whether or not he's going to try and catch up with who you find out is Roland and Jake, or who you kind of know is Roland and Jake. But like, what would happen then if
he just ran out, hey guys, wait.
Right? And what, the other thing, the comparison as far as what happened with Callahan and with what happened with Jake is Callahan, or I think it's Jake asked Callahan if he remembers dying.
Yeah.
Callahan's like, no. And then Jake's like, I remember both of them. And you're just like, damn, like both.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's messed up.
That's interesting that Callahan
Right.
didn't remember dying. Huh.
And I'm wondering if it's maybe Black 13 pulling Callahan to the way station, like,
yeah,
kind of like preemptively, like it may have probably would have happened anyway if he would have fallen and hit the pavement, but like he went out the window and Black 13 was just like got excited and was like yanks him into there and so he doesn't. But there's a couple other things they're talking about, which is very interesting about being able to go anywhere you want to with Black 13. And I think this is when they're all talking in the group afterwards, and like Callahan talks about going back in time and saving JFK.
Oh, yeah, I know. I thought about 11/22/63.
And I was like, man, Stephen King has been, because he mentions like, in these books he mentions Kennedy several times, and Susanna's always like, he's a gunslinger. And then there's other books where he mentions JFK, and King's a big JFK fan apparently. So
yeah, dude, people
and the fact that
people,
they love
JFK.
Yes, big time. But that's a cool little thing. But the idea that kind of Jake and Eddie kind of look at each other and kind of have that calf where they're talking in minds or whatever, is the two people that saved Callahan are Tower and Deepno. And
that makes sense.
Again, like that's crazy. But then the question that Eddie has is, well, if it's them, how did they know? How did they know to go to that particular place at that particular time to save Callahan?
Yeah.
And that's kind of how like he ends that part. He's like, that makes sense that it's them, but how in the world did they know to be there?
I wonder if Eddie tells. I wonder if, but I wonder if Eddie tells them.
So that's kind of the whole thing with. And there's a couple other things. One that were neat. One is Bango Skank. He sees the graffiti. Okay, Bango Skank is some graffiti artist that shows up all over Stephen King books. Like,
oh, really? Huh.
It's usually Bango Skank was here or something, but Bango Skank is all over the place. So that was a cool little thing. The fact that, again, the whole coincidences thing. So, like, Callahan comes back to New York, goes and visits his friend in the hospital, leaves, gets beat up by the Hitler brothers, comes back the same day, essentially,
hospital room.
Gets put in that hospital room after his friend dies.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And then find out, like, he finally kind of hits rock bottom and starts coming out of things in Topeka.
Oh, that was...
And he finds himself with Charlie Choo Choo.
Yeah.
And, like, they're like, just wow, like, what more could, like...
That scene of him having a seizure and just the way that was written, of like every moment of that was so wild. Yeah.
Yes.
That was a crazy part of the book, and a really, and a testament to a really good writer.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good part. And really the other thing is how he winds up getting to the Calla. So like after the cave, what do they call it? The doorway cave. So the doorway cave used to be called the Cave of Voices.
Whispers or Voices or
something.
So,
yeah. But then all of a sudden the door shows up in the cave.
Yeah.
And then so the Manny know all these regions and they don't go there because of the voices and how, the voices essentially pull up your worst thoughts that you've ever had and put it in the voice of those people, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But they go into another. They go into another cave.
It's interesting that cave was doing that before the door was there,
Yes, I know, right?
And then the doors seem to be placed by something to make sure they're where they need to be, which I know there's the whole Ka thing.
Yeah.
But like I'm and then there's the connection from the orbs to the doors. Like I'm thinking that the orbs of Merlin's rainbow or whatever are somehow connected to the doors, like there's an invisible thread to each orb to a door, and somehow someone or something is placing the doors where they need to be. Otherwise, why they keep ending up like Roland's never seen one in his life, and then
somebody is definitely placing the doors.
Yeah, and then and Black 13 is like definitely tied to this one because they need Black 13 in order to be able to control it, you know. And maybe because they couldn't control the other doors because they didn't have a, you know,
right.
They didn't have any of the other ones.
Maybe so. And even back then, someone was opening those doors.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. So
who are the Manny?
The Manny are.
I know they've come up several. This is not the first time I've heard.
Yes. I think of the Manny as like druids.
Yeah.
Like they're. You know, they wear the robes. They're all into like chanting and the land and like nature and you know, it's kind of, but it's also magic because they do travel between worlds and things like that. So like,
now do they use the doors? Like, how do they travel between worlds?
You'll find out. You'll find out more about the Manny. So and pretty soon. So, but. The Manny they go into another cave and they wind up finding what I'm assuming is a reel-to-reel tape player. That's what it sounded like.
Oh, it's a cassette player. Yeah.
Yeah, and they says you push this button and they play it and like some voice tells them to go up to that cave and find this guy.
I actually forgot all about that. Yeah, you're right.
And so like here's another thing, like somebody put the doors where they need to be. Whoever put the door there made a recording to
put the tape there.
So they put that tape there, and kind of going back to what you were saying with the Man in Black, I feel like the person that made the tape was the Man in Black.
Yeah, it had to be.
I feel like he's putting the door there.
Yeah, it had to be. I don't know about the door, but it had to be him. That's what I picture as far as the cassette player, and it's got like a signature or like a tie back to Callahan's story because it has the song that keeps coming up
right
in Callahan's story. So,
and again, it's all like
it's so that when and it's something from Callahan's time period. So whenever he hears it, he knows, like he has to know, like this was placed here and meant for you to find. And then it works until the batteries run out. And then they're like, have you ever, was it Duracell? It's like, have you ever?
Yeah. It takes batteries. But yeah, so like you go back to the beginning or the end of the last book where, you know, someone packs them lunches and does all that stuff. Pretty sure that's the Man in Black too, which is why I'm saying, like, it's maybe not evil is the right word, but he's not necessarily doing things like, I feel like at some point he could do more to stop them if he wanted to really stop them. Like, he's kind of like the Scooby-Doo bad guy, like that they do these roundabout things to try and stop, you know, do something, but instead of like, or like Austin Powers was like, you know, just give me a gun and I'll shoot him. Like, why am I going to put him in this thing and drown him? Like, just let me shoot him. Like, I feel like he does a lot of that stuff. Like,
I think he's just toying with him. I think
he's toying with him, but I think there's more to it.
There's got to be more to it. But what I'm saying is the reason I think he's evil is because, you know, he turned an entire town of people on Roland because he knew Roland would be forced to kill everybody in the town, even children. I mean, he told the one guy the whole secret to the meaning of life and death, and when he hears the word 19, and like he's done a bunch of stuff. He brought that one guy back to life whenever he knew that it would bring him back to life as like this like morbidly like zombified creature. Like, I don't think he's a good guy, David.
Well, he helped release a plague onto one world, and basically,
yeah, that's right. That's right.
I
He
mean,
helped
like,
release an entire plague that killed like 78 or 80% of the population or something like that in the Stand.
but I feel like kind of like maybe like Kang, or like maybe having like the Time Stone. Like, I feel like again, I think he is like looking at this timeline, and he can see things all along the timeline, even things that aren't happening yet.
Yeah.
And I think he's doing things like the sandwiches and stuff, like, because he knows that, hey, they got to this point, that means that, you know, they have to get to here, so I'm just going to help them out a little bit. Or like, what's the point of me trying to, you know, do something more, because at this point they're still going to have to be here at this point to do this at this point. And
you having read more, do you know it was him that did the sandwiches?
No, I don't think they ever
wrap that up. There's no
specifically says, but I think it's inferred more than anything, like, because, you know, there's also the note that was in the tree and all that, like, and that's just like a taunty, smart-assy thing that the Man in Black does. Like,
yeah, I just wonder why. He's not allowed to kill him, I guess, but he doesn't have to make him.
That's another thing. Like, it's weird. Like, I think he has to go by rules of.
It is so similar to the Man in Black and Lost that it has.
Yes,
the Man in Black and Lost has to be based on Walter.
Well, you know, they were huge.
It has to be
Stephen King fans.
Lifted from the Dark Tower, because
right.
in the same way, there's rules. He's not allowed to outright just kill Roland. You know,
right?
So it's crazy.
That was a big thing as far as Callahan. Now the other part. So you get this kind of the idea about what the whole Rice religion almost is with Ryza and Lady Ryza, and you find out that, like, it's this old tale about a woman who kills. I guess he rapes her. I never really. He kills it. He kills her father.
Yeah.
In some way,
and she. Not straight up rape, but she insinuates that she's going to have sex with him, and he's just like a horny old dude. So he comes over, and then she
and then like
he won't off with a plate,
right? But he won't meet her because he knows that she'll want revenge.
Yeah.
So she says that we'll both be naked, and then they make the special dinner plate, and of course, plate thing comes up again.
It kind of reminded me a little bit of the whole Susanna and the creepy old dude and the mayor,
right?
I don't know. That dynamic reminded me of being the same, but
a cool little side thing with this is when they're telling the story of Lady Ryza and Grey Dick. That when Lady Ryza is discussing her plan, she discusses the plan with her handmaid, whose name was Marion, Maid Marion.
Oh,
and then then right after that it says, it says something like, you've probably heard a lot of her adventures or something like that. So there's another tie-in with
another book
with Arthur, with King Arthur and Arthur Eld and all this stuff that, you know, there's Maid Marian. So, you know, you get that little tie-in. But yeah, so Roland gets to see which is really cool. Like, my big thing is, I play disc golf. I've thrown disc type things. These chicks are ridiculously accurate. Like, so the one, when she first does it, he's like, I don't know what a sharp root, but I'm guessing it's a little bit smaller than a potato. And he's talking about how she cuts it in half from 60 yards. And I'm like, 60 yards? Like, if you think about a football field, I mean, that's over half of the football field that she threw accurately a plate and took off something in half that's that big.
I didn't think about it that way.
But again, like, if you think of, and they kind of mention it, like it's Ka that they come to this place and that these people do this. And
oh yeah,
so it's not a coincidence that like it's not even that you have to suspend belief or these telling you have to suspend belief. It's just that's how it is. Like,
yeah, I like how they have this whole secret society too, like the women in
yes,
these communities, and it's not just this one town. There's like other towns
it's
too,
the other Kalas.
and they're like, some of them are like keeping it secret from their husbands and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Oh,
they have competitions,
and they have husband size. You know, their targets
right?
are husband size, and I thought that was funny for two reasons. One was, it was like, maybe it's husband size because the way she drew it was she had him leaning against the wall that she outlined him, or maybe it's husband size because they intentionally practice to make sure that they have the upper hand in their household. But then also they have this story that they tell about this woman that is like this hero story where she, like, you know, gets revenge for the death of her father using this plate, and it's a plate which is like a womanly household item, especially in like a story like this where it's kind of a period story like this. And I think it fits the theme. And then some of the themes that we get on in part 3 with Susanna's story, I feel like that, and we'll talk about it when we wrap up the whole thing, but like I feel like there's a lot of connections there that I think we can.
Oh, definitely.
But I told Becca the other night, about the plate throwing thing. She was like, "How does he come up with this? Like, there's the crazy."
I know, right?
I keep telling Becca like about like some just small theme that's in any one of these Dark Tower books, and it's just like, it seems so like, wait, this is the same book with a talking train? Like, what?
Right, exactly.
This is the same book series.
We're going all over the place.
It starts out smuggling cocaine from the Bahamas to like women are throwing plates, and then that story is now being brought back into this. It's just so crazy how all this mingles together. It's like like a D&D campaign.
Oh, definitely. But yeah, so like they've got all these plates. There's several women that are really good at it, and so like again, it's Ka, like something clicks with Roland. He's like, you know, I know, like
this is the weapon.
This is it. Like, and then he's like, I want either Susanna or Jake to learn it, preferably Susanna. And of course, she takes to it because.
And that's another thing too. The way Stephen King writes Susanna's character, where the fact that she's in a wheelchair, I felt like whenever we read the second book and they introduced her and she was in the wheelchair in Roland's world, I was like, how are they going to do this? How are they going to go through an entire like hero's journey, like Lord of the Rings style story, where every time they push Susanna's wheelchair through like a sandy beach or a forest floor, like this is gonna be like a huge, like, I'm like, how is this even gonna how's this even gonna
logistically work? How does it work? She's
gonna eventually get magic legs where she can walk the rest of the story or something, like any other writer would have written some way to just shoehorn in now she's got legs,
exactly.
And it's Brandon Sanderson said something about, like, I can't even remember what this was in reference to, but he was talking about how this is fantasy. Anything can happen. You could open a treasure chest that all of a sudden turns you into a completely different character, or just splits you into two. Oh, I remember what it was. It was talking about Shallan and the different characters within Shallan. Well, it's like, this is a fantasy world. She could open a treasure chest tomorrow that splits her into 3 different people, and then we can just continue the story that way. There's so many ways that Stephen King could have written a way to get around this wheelchair situation, but he chose not to. And it is such a like non-part of her character. It's only mentioned whenever it has to be, And I think in the whole plates thing, that whole with her learning to throw the plates, and then she's like really good at it, but yet she kind of has to stand up in her wheelchair to do it, but she still throws it over her shoulder and everything. Like, it's such a, he could have gotten away from that, and he didn't. I think that's a very conscious choice.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. He writes her so well, and he doesn't like,
I just thought of another thing about her too.
Was that?
Whenever one of the characters who has probably only ever seen another black woman one time in his entire life, he calls her a brownie, and she threatens to pull his tongue out, cut it off, and wipe his ass with it.
Yes, that was Took when they go to Took store.
Yeah, that's a good funny.
Yeah, that's a funny.
But then the characters are also not perfect either, because
no, definitely not.
Yeah,
well, this part gets into that too, because when we talk about the quartet is broken, and Jake knows the quartet is broken because once again they're all keeping secrets from each other.
I wanted to talk about everybody's secret. I feel like everybody has a secret at this point, or I don't know. Susanna arguably.
She knows that it's kind of weird because she does have Mia, and things, but I think she definitely knows, and she's known that she's pregnant. I think she's just kind of like not blocked it out, but like she's not showing, and she's still having her period and like all this stuff, so she doesn't have to think about being pregnant all the time. And then the feeding and stuff, she doesn't know anything about. So I think
in that way, she's not keeping that secret. She's
not keeping that. She knows she's pregnant, but it's like it's so far in the back of her mind.
Yeah.
That it doesn't.
I remember being whenever I was. So my stepmom got pregnant. I was like an older teenager, like maybe even 18. And I was like, there's no way I just remember thinking like, there's no way. Like my younger sister was like 11 years old or something. I was like 18, and I was like, there's no way there's going to be a third child in the house. Like we can't all be 10 years apart. Like that's insane.
Right.
I'm not going to be almost 20 years older than my youngest sister. And I remember just like, it's not real. I remember thinking it wasn't real all the way up until the point that they brought the baby home. Like I just never let myself believe it, you know? And that's the craziest thing, because she was showing, you know what I mean? Like it was obviously going to happen, but it was just like every time, you know, I would just think like, yeah, it can't be a real thing.
It's not happening.
And so that's where I think Susanna is. She knows, but she doesn't want to admit that she knows, you know?
Right. And of course, Roland's been keeping the secret of it for a while. And then he brings Eddie into it. And then he's like, you know, don't tell her. And then keep an eye on her, you know, just in case. And, you know, she does the whole eating the pig thing, the baby pig. And all that.
My gosh. The baby pig thing. That scene was so crazy. I thought Susanna was eating a baby. Even before
I did too.
Even before Eddie said it, I thought for sure that, man, this is the most sadistic thing Stephen King has written. I thought I just even before. So there's a part where she pulls out the roast, and she said she laughs because for a second she thought it was a chubby baby, but it's just a pig. Even before that moment, somehow I thought that's what was happening. How did Stephen King write the scene so that we would all have that thought?
Right.
And then
we're sadistic.
And then he reestablishes it, or he falsely confirms it with her thinking it's a baby. And then 80 starts having the same fear,
right, and
wanting to see the kids in the morning and wanting to go check on the kids in the night, but he's too worried about getting caught doing that, and so he just hopes he'll see them in the morning. I the whole time, and then that chapter ends before you find out.
Yes, it does.
And the whole time I thought that's what happened. I don't know how. Yeah. I don't know how he signaled that so early.
Exactly. I don't know. But yeah, like so. I mean, so Eddie's in on the secret, and then of course Jake's secret is, you know, heartbreaking too. Like he's found this friend in Beanie Slightman, and he's finally getting to do kid things and blah blah. And then he sees the elder Slightman and Andy when they're camping out. He sees them like down the river,
Yeah.
talking, and then Slightman goes across the river and goes toward Thunderclap, and so he knows something's up. Like, he knows something's up, and he doesn't want to tell Roland because he's afraid of the consequences of this. Because, like, I mean, I know he had thoughts that, you know, Roland's going to kill him or whatever, but the bigger thing was he's worried about Benny's reaction to finding out that, you know, his dad's a possible traitor or something. He doesn't know exactly what yet, but he knows you don't go to see talk clandestinely at night with Andy.
Yeah.
And then go over.
Yeah.
And go into Thunderclap. Like, and you know, they're dropping these little hints all in here about Andy too. Like, they don't necessarily trust Andy, that, you know,
there's no way Eddie
he says and does, and
yeah,
even like, the questions, like, they're like, you know, why do you think Andy doesn't tell you this thing, or why doesn't he do this?
Yeah,
and
Eddie makes,
it's like they thought about that for the first time. They're like,
yeah, Eddie makes the point that if Andy was built before the wolves, then who programmed Andy to not tell you about the wolves? And
right.
Whenever Eddie tells him that, it's like the first time they've thought about it. And it kind of goes back to the whole thing with Susanna pretending she's not pregnant, or Eddie not wanting to admit that she's pregnant, where it's like they probably have thought of that, but they just have dismissed it. You know, just like in that scene, one person asks another person from the Calla, and that other person is like, oh, well, it's because they knew that something like the wolves would one day exist. And so they wrote it in just in case, you know what I mean? Like obviously Eddie's right. And I don't know. So let's talk about Eddie's secret.
Eddie's secret with the talking with the old man.
Right. Exactly. So I know that, you know, cause you've read the whole book, but just to give the Cliff Notes version of that whole story is he sees one with the mask off, and he tells his son what he saw, and his son told him not to tell anybody, and he's never told anybody until he tells Eddie.
Right.
I have two theories, and I don't want you to tell me if I'm right. So turn off your camera. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. So I have two theories. One is that he pulled the mask off and it was like a townsfolk. Like maybe they are the wolves, but either from some other time period, or, you know, like or they're twins, or like, I was one of the kids that was taken somehow or another. I think it could be a townsfolk is what he saw when he pulled the mask off the wolf. Or it was another Andy. They're all just Andys. They're all a bunch of robots. Otherwise, I don't know what he could have seen that he would have known what it was. You know what I mean? Like if he pulled the mask off and it was some other creature from some other world, and Roland knows what it is, he wouldn't have known what it was. And when he told his son wouldn't have said, "Oh, you got to keep that secret." It has to either be a bunch of Andys, or has something to do with the townspeople themselves. That's where my mind's at on that.
Both very good.
So
I mean,
Can I ask? I'm going to ask a few questions about that. I'm really intrigued by this. So, one is, how long until I know? Will I find out? Is it that the very end of the book, or is it like mid, through this section?
It's probably. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's the end of the book, but you'll find out fairly. Well, I won't ask you how far you've gotten on the next part.
I've only read till I've only read until Eddie starts talking about the doorway.
Okay,
but I haven't read. He's just the idea. I read the first chapter basically.
Okay. There's a lot of stuff getting ready to happen.
I started the next chapter, but I haven't gotten all the way into it.
But yeah, I mean, like, so obviously the big clues for this are, one, the whole thing with the horses all being gray.
Yeah, I have no idea what that could mean.
And then all the wolves dressed the same with the same masks and stuff like that.
I mean, I'm thinking about the Wizard of Oz. I'm trying to think of like what could it be from that.
So yeah, I mean, like you'll find out. You'll definitely find out like pretty soon about that stuff.
All right, one more question. One more question. If I didn't read another sentence, as much as I've read up to this point that you know that I've read, is there enough clues there that I could figure it out?
Yeah.
God damn it. I don't know what it is. I feel like I should figure it out. I don't know what it is.
Who says you haven't? You just gave me two options. One of those could be right. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you. So yeah, like, Eddie, basically what he finds out is one, that talking to the old pair and three other people make a stand against wolves, or one or two wolves, or whatever. And the Red Molly, she's one of the Ariza sisters, and she throws a plate and she takes out one of the wolves. So that also, number one, tells you that
they're killable.
The plate is going to be,
yeah,
they're killable, and the plate is effective against them.
Yeah.
And then also, like, one of the dudes that's with him shoots one of the wolves with one of the bars, and the bolt just kind of like bounces off of him, essentially.
Yeah.
And so that's not effective. And he kind of makes a point that, you know, he shot the wolf in the chest where she hit him like in the neck, head area, something. So, you know, maybe foreshadowing a weakness or something like that. And then, like, you also find out that they were worried that they were going to come back and, like, you know, grab the guy, whatever it is, and that didn't happen either.
And the Sneech, or whatever they call it, the drone thing, ran out of power. Chasing the guy for a while, and
which those kind of those things are like, so you got the Sneech thing that just basically is like a heat-seeking missile, I guess, type thing. But it doesn't. I don't know. It sounds like it's got. Did you ever see? And I think
it's like a DJI. It's like a DJI heat-seeking missile.
It was like a drone. You know, Phantasm.
I know.
Did you ever see the movie Phantasm with the orb that had the little blades that would come out of it and all that? That's what I'm thinking. Like some orb that just shark attacks you and just cuts you to shreds.
I'm trying to remember the movie Phantasm. I know I have seen it.
It's creepy guy with white hair that has the orbs, but so there's that, and then there's these lightning or fire sticks or whatever it is they call them, and he's like basically touches them and he lights up on fire.
So they're kind of like lightsabers, but they light you on fire.
Right. So like he finds out all this stuff, so they definitely get a good like background of what to expect from the wolves from that. And so like it's got Roland's, you know, mind churning even more. And you know, that's another secret that Roland is keeping, is he's got a plan.
But
he's not telling, especially townspeople, but he's not telling really anybody what his plan is. And in fact, he's letting stuff that's not true get spread.
Yeah, it's really intriguing, Roland's plan he's putting together. I mean, it reminds me of the plan at the end of the previous book where he's coming up with
he wants it to sound like that.
He's telling the townspeople that he's gonna hide the kids in a certain cave, and this is in the next section though. I'm skipping ahead. All we know from part 2. So if you're a listener and you've only listened,
I think he's kind of mentioned the cave.
He's mentioned the cave, yeah. But the reason why, you can assume, but the reason why he doesn't say till the first chapter of part 3,
right? Because he asked somebody, he's like, what do you think about this cave? And I forgot who he was talking to. He's like, oh, you're thinking about hiding the kids there? And he's, you know, kind of like keep it a secret, hush kind of thing. But like,
he knows they're going to tell. Yeah.
he knows they're going to tell. The same thing with, he tells the farm hands that he'll kill them if they mention anything about the throwing of the dish. Yeah. And then the next time they throw the dish, there's like a bunch of people because they all tell the secret.
If you know what that is funny. They're supposed to keep that whole thing a secret, and then like the whole town shows up to watch. You know what it's kind of like is whenever Shallan is trying to figure out who her spy is, and so she tells her suspects 3 different stories, and then she figures out who it is based on who.
Right.
Or was that Shallan, or was that?
That was Shallan.
Oh, it was? Okay, yeah.
It was. What's her name?
Yeah, it was
the other version.
Man, we're so disconnected.
Starts with a V. I think. Veil. Yes. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like, so all these secrets, and then Jake has a kind of a Toadash thing where he sees when Mia's eating the pig and all that stuff. So he finds out what's going on, and he finds out that Eddie and Roland know, and they've been keeping a secret. And so, like, now he's like, this is bright. And he confronts Roland, which is kind of cool. Like, he's like, you've said before that, this can't happen and us succeed, but yet this is happening kind of thing. And
yeah,
they kind of come to a compromise because Jake wants to tell, and he even thought about telling her without even mentioning it to Roland first, but he decides to see Roland first. But they kind of basically say, hey, we'll keep it a secret, but before the fighting happens, we will tell her everything we know. And then Jake kind of accepts that as a decent compromise. But he also knows that it's not Susanna, it's Mia, and because he heard all the thing too, so he knows that the split personality stuff is back. So the kind of before we wrap it up, so the theme that we've been going with for the last couple books with the authors and things like that. So like the rose, a stone, and a door, and an unfound door, which I didn't know was, from a different book. It's from Thomas Wolfe.
Yeah.
And so the quote, and I want to read it and see, I've read it a couple times. I'm trying to decide what this means as far as what the story is.
Yeah. Does it have any tie into the story?
Yeah. So the book is from Look Homeward Angel, which I know the name of that.
I've never heard of it. I mean,
there was a popular movie apparently, and which I never see. Thomas Wolfe is from Asheville.
Oh,
and so when I was reading about this, so they say his works are kind of semi-autobiographical. So he uses a lot of his history and puts it into a fiction story. Yeah. And this is basically about a guy growing up in a small town, a mountain town, basically like Asheville kind of thing. But anyway, right. Well, this was written though. This was like pretty old.
Would have been before.
But anyway,
before the hipster takeover of Asheville.
Right. So it says. This starts, a stone, a leaf, an unfound door, a stone, a leaf, a door, and all of the forgotten faces. Naked and alone, we came into exile. In her dark womb, we did not know our mother's face. From the prison of her flesh have we come into the unspeakable and incommunicable prison of this earth. Which of us has known his brother? Which of us has looked into his father's heart? Which of us has not remained forever prison pent? Which of us is not forever a stranger and alone? O waste of lost in the hot mazes, lost among bright stars on this weary, unbright cinder, lost, remembering speechlessly we seek the great forgotten language, the lost land, end into heaven, a stone, a leaf, an unfound door. Where, when, O lost, and by the wind grieved ghosts, come back again.
Man, that is some flowery language, man.
That is some like
I like
some prose.
That is
Yeah,
some heavy prose. And it
one of the things
it seems on I can't pinpoint it,
well,
but it feels on theme.
Right. That's why it's like some of these things like Naked and Alone, we came into exile, and like some of these things you're like, okay, I get it, but I don't see like a big light didn't come on and I was like, oh my God, like this was literally the first time I've looked this up, and all the times I've read this, I finally was like, I'm going to see what the whole thing is, because a stone, a leaf, and a door thing seems to be a big thing in the Dark Tower. And maybe
is this book the first time? Obviously, doors show up, but is this the first time we've actually had a stone, a leaf, and a door? Like those three things together?
I know I don't, because the first one is the prisoner, and then Lady of Shadows, and then the pusher, and then you have the unfound door, which I think they mentioned that. I think when Eddie makes the door in the dirt, he has to write unfound. So that's one of the things. But I don't know. Yeah, I don't think they meant, maybe.
If it goes back to Eddie drawing the door in the dirt, then it seems like it's something that was in Stephen King's mind.
Well, at least the unfound part. And I'm sure it is. But I can't remember if he quoted that.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is, we're going to have to go research this maybe and talk about it for our final review of the book. But I'm trying to figure out if it is just a coincidence that Stephen King found that was those lines were so on theme for his book that he needed to include it for the rest of the series, or if it's like from the beginning, that is something that he took inspiration from. Because I know that the original book, the first book, The Gunslinger, is tied to a poem.
Yes.
And if you read that poem, it's kind of the same way, where it's like not the same thing, but the themes are the same,
Right.
That's so crazy.
My guess is, as far as inspiration, definitely. Like, I'm sure when he was writing, I think that's Wastelands, when they rescue Jake.
Yes.
And so, like, I'm sure Unfound Door was like, even if he didn't mention the stone, the leaf, but I feel like he did. I feel like that was mentioned then.
I'm with you. I don't feel like I don't feel like it's the first time I've heard it, but I can't.
But either way, even if you took the leaf and stone out and Eddie just simply wrote unfound, I think that would still have been enough to show that's an inspiration, because where else would you hear the term unfound door? Like, it
has to be connected.
That's not random. Like, and again, this is 2, 3, 4 paragraphs of a novel. So, like, without reading the entire novel, the whole novel could shed more light on this. So
we're not even through with the series yet, and I'm already wanting to start over. I
know, right?
I want to read the Gunslinger again, and let's do the podcast again where we review it. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. You could do, I know that they're out there, I know that they exist, but you could do a whole podcast on just the Dark Tower.
Oh yeah.
It's crazy.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean,
I want to research that more. I want to research the stone, the leaf, the door, the unfound door thing. Research that a little bit more and talk about it next week.
Right. Yeah.
There's got to be more tie-in. There's got to be more tie-in.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. There's I forgot. Well, I marked that quote here, but I didn't mark. There's a kind of a synopsis of the book that Look Homeward Angel. It's called Look Homeward Angel, A Story of Buried Life. But apparently it's a very quotable book. And it was his first book. Doesn't say when it was written right here, but I feel like it was like late 1800s, maybe something like that old.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, so again, it's another one of those things where, and also believe he's quoted Thomas Wolfe.
Oh, I'm sure of
in
that.
other ways too, because
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's not the first time we've heard Thomas Wolfe come mentioned. So there's that too. But yeah, I mean, it's really like coming to a head now. Like you've got all the pieces in place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there it's get ready for a bang, non-stop thrill ride of an ending here.
Yeah, I was wondering if because most of this book has been all set up, and I was wondering, are we going to get to the end of this and it's going to be like, and then they finally face the wolves. Stay tuned for the next book, or if like if they're going to fight the wolves in this last part, then I feel like where I'm at now, it needs to come up pretty soon. But
yeah, I mean, obviously, but
the previous book was the same way though, and Roland even says it that this sort of thing is like a big build up to like 10 minutes of violence. You know what I mean?
Right.
Roland
yeah, exactly.
81 says that.
Yeah, Roland says, yeah, that's in actuality the battle's only going to be a few minutes long. Yeah. But yeah, so from here, even though you did have the kind of the cliffhanger at the end of Wastelands with Blaine, and then you kind of sandwich in the story from Wizard and Glass, but like it's a big like one long story kind of from here out, like so it's not necessarily cliffhangers each time, but it's not like you're gonna wrap up things at the end of this and then start something completely new at the it's on its track now and it's running like
we're giving it riddles to keep it going.
Exactly.
The way I heard the last 3 books described in another video I watched, he said that essentially the last 3 books are a trilogy, and the prior books were sort of setting up for this trilogy. That this is the real trilogy of the story. So I understand.
Well, if you I think it's the last 2 books. I can't remember if it's this book and the next one, Song of Susanna, or Song of Susanna, then The Dark Tower. But 2 of those books came out in the same year because, like, this is the first book he wrote. Well, not the first book he wrote, but he picked this back up after his accident.
Yeah,
and it was one of those things where he was like, I think, kind of in that mindset was like, if I don't get this out, I may never get out. The brush with death kind of thing. Like,
yeah,
I've left this story half told. I need to finish it. But then he's got a book called On Writing. Is about like his writing process and things like that. But he also talked about how there was a lot of spaces between the other books, and like he said he would lose the voice of or whatever, and he would put him aside. He said after the accident, when he started thinking about it, and he started with this book, he was like, it was like something hit him, and he had to get it out. Like it wasn't his choice. It had to come out, and that's why like he was basically
he probably
writing books back to back to back.
Yeah, he probably didn't want to, he
didn't want to George R. Martin it.
Right, yeah. He didn't want to be stuck where he couldn't continue the series and then he dies, and then instead of his legacy being, because imagine if he never finished the Dark Tower series, but he wrote every other book that he's written, then we would be like, oh yeah, Stephen King's a great writer. It sure, and then that sentence would always end with, it sure is a shame he never finished his series.
Right. Like once we get through the end of it and you see how everything shakes out,
yeah,
you'll be like, there's no way anybody else could have ever picked that up and finished it as far as like another. Even his son, like that's Joe Hill, that's so good. I don't think
Joe
would have
Hill.
come up with this.
So the bridge, the walking across the bridge and ending up in the wrong place reminded me of Nosferatu. And
Yeah.
I was wondering if there was some sort of Stephen King world connection there. I've never actually read any of his books. I watched the Nosferatu show, and Scott loves Joe Hill, so I've heard about his books from
Yes,
Scott.
he's really the book Nosferatu is fantastic. I haven't
Yeah.
watched the show.
I watched most of it. I didn't finish it. I watched most of it.
But now in Nosferatu, there's big time crossover with.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's like I don't like I said, I've never watched the show, but there's there's a part where she gets a map and it's a map of the other world.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of the places on that map are places from like there's like something Pennywise or something.
I saw
and
that. Yeah.
There's something else like so. There's a few definite crossovers with that. So
yeah, I remember I saw that whenever it came up. So to give you a bookmark check, here's where we are in the book.
Let's see. I got about that much left. According to this, I'm on page 603, but there's no telling.
Yeah, our copies are probably. I'm on 506, but our copies are probably not. You have the copy with the pictures?
Yeah.
So they're not lined up.
No. And I was going to say, I can't tell you where I'm at because then.
Yeah, because it'll be a spoiler. Yeah. Yeah, where I'm at, Eddie is. So I guess spoiler alert. If you've only read part 2, then sorry. I'm at the part where Eddie he's like getting ready to go through the doorway back to New York. He's convinced Roland that it's a good idea.
Right.
So my theory. All right.
Let's hear your theories. I like it.
All right. I don't even know if I want to talk to you about this because I feel like there's no way you can talk about it without spoiling it.
I'll keep a poker face.
I'll just put it this way. I'll tell you what would be a tragic ending. I know that somebody dies.
Ending of this story or about the whole
of Eddie
shebang?
Of Eddie in general.
Okay.
So what would be a tragic ending would be if Eddie kills Balazar before, like when Balazar's young, before his brother ever, sets Eddie up to smuggle drugs, before, so there's no drug smuggling, there's no Roland going through his doorway. None of that happens. This whole history of Eddie getting off drugs and becoming a better person and a stable person, that version of events just evaporates and Eddie dies as like a heroin addict in New York City.
A very, very bleak ending.
Yeah, that would be a very, very bleak ending. So the fact that you laughed makes me feel like that's not what happens to Eddie.
Yeah, that definitely does not happen. So, I mean, we can definitely. So we got part 3.
Yeah,
I'd like to do part 3, and if it takes a long time for us to get to it, then fine. Then maybe do another show, kind of like a wrap up of the whole thing, maybe, or like
I don't know. We
like because, I'm just thinking like because things you're gonna find out in part 3 are gonna lead back to talking about things. Anyway, we can probably get it all.
Oh yeah. So the way I would picture the next episode would be we just talk about the whole book, and
right, because this definitely going to tie into because again, no spoiler, but there's been a lot of foreshadowing in this book that once you read certain things in this next part, you're gonna be like, oh crap, yeah, like I should have seen that, like you were saying before. You see, yeah, you will, and when you find out things, you're going to want to go back and look at those things. So I'm excited about that, and then kind of see what you think about the very end. But no, Eddie does definitely not die of heroin overdose or anything. Like
that would be the bleakest. That would be the worst ending because it would be like everything that Eddie went through doesn't matter anymore. and because it would all get reversed. I don't know.
This might be. I mean, I know we've been on here for a little while, but this is another one of the things that this story brings up. Inevitably happens with all time travel things is just like that. What happens if he goes back and kills Balazard? Is whatever happened, and we're kind of getting into that because they're confronting Andolini and the guy that's with him, and
but there are things that's different in this version of New York than theirs, so they're not really.
But that's why I'm wondering, is it? Do you get away with it by doing things like let's say because Andolini dies by the lobstrosities.
Yeah.
So let's say in this book somehow Roland or Eddie or Jake, Susanna, whoever winds up killing Andolini. This is before all that. So then, how do you reconcile that he gets killed later? And that's the thing, is that one of the confusing things, and he doesn't really address it, is what world
if it's there
is all
New
this
York,
taking place? Because there's different versions that they go to.
Right.
And you've already started finding out that there's because they're talking about with Tower that they can't, once they go to a time, they can't go back to a time before that. They can only go forward.
Okay, the Charlie the Choo Choo has a different author in this world than it did in Jake's. I don't even know that Eddie Dean in Jake's world is the same Eddie Dean. So there is an Eddie Dean in Jake's world.
Right.
But we don't even know that it's the same.
It's the same one, right.
Right.
So I'm thinking that's how he gets away with it. But again, he's starting to talk about the core world. And
he mentions that because it's close to the rose.
Because it's close to the rose.
They can only go forward in time.
They can only go forward in time. So once they go to whatever that last date is, June 25th or whatever, that they can't then go to June 24th. They can only go to the 26th or the 27th. And that's why they're on such a time constraint, because once that July thing comes.
Yeah, and it's
so we know they're going to that world, but again, with you, I don't think that world is the world that even our Eddie is from. I think Eddie was from a different New York.
I think it's Into the Spider-Verse rules. Like if you go back and kill Peter Parker before he turns into Spider-Man in his Earth, whatever, then you screwed things up. Well, like in Miles Morales' case, I don't want to spoil the next movie that hasn't even come out yet, but if you go kill Peter Parker in Earth 47 or whatever, where he's not Spider-Man, then it doesn't
matter in the other one.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. All the Spider-Mans across the universe don't just stop appearing,
Stop existing. There's going to be a lot of that, by the way.
One funny thing I heard about, I think I've already told this joke, but in Back to the Future, there's some version of history where someone just took a picture of the front yard with nobody standing there. There's some version of history where someone just went out there and went,
that looks like an interesting place.
All right, well, let's wrap this thing up, and I'll try to marathon through this and read it pretty quickly.
I've been. Like I said, it really picks up steam, and then I've been reading, but man, I don't want to put it down because it's really getting going. So
I've been.
Don't read any of the notes.
I did.
Because I was looking through, I was like, man, there's a lot of spoilers.
I didn't read a line below it. I didn't see anything. I caught up to you because I had like a thing at work where I had to go in every day last week. So every single day I had to drive, and so I had time to listen. So that was how I caught up. But I've been reading the Kindle and then listening because they'll sync with each other. And we talked about how I had an issue where for whatever reason, the chapters are broke up different on the audiobook versus the Kindle. So, but now that's fixed. I just checked and it syncs perfect now. So yeah, we just had to get to that part. Anyway. All right. We'll see you next week, and peace.